One big through.
The one she gave me.
It's pretty cool. Yeah. It is. Even at 70, but we can change it. They're big cold. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. So we'll start in just a moment. I want to do some housekeeping before we get going. So welcome to our space. Thank you all for being here. You feel free to go out and grab coffee and tea at any time if you want some more of that. Bathrooms, this one has a little trouble, so go into the hallway back here behind the elevators, and there's both bathrooms in the hallway back there. One other housekeeping note before we get started, which is we're recording with Owl, and for those who've used that before, if there's a lot of voice back here, it's not going to pick up here, so we'll do our best to, we're going to have conversations later, and we won't worry about that part, right? But just while we're doing the presentations, you're going to be on camera if you're talking near it. So I am Scott Goldstein. I'm the founder and executive director of EmpowerEd, and the story I always tell about the starting of EmpowerEd that it really relates to this is that I taught for 10 years in DC. I was out of school with really high turnover in my last few years teaching. We had 4 principals over the course of a year. We had 30, 40, 50% of the staff leave a few years in a row. And I really, in that time, was seeing the impact of teacher turnover on the students that I was teaching, on the expectation that they wouldn't have their mentors and role models there year over year. But one of the things I experienced was having 2 pretty different principals in my first couple of years there. One who I would describe as exceedingly human-centered. I happened to have my first child towards the end of the first year that I was there, and I will always remember the reaction that he gave me when I was very nervous to have this conversation. And for those who know Saw Brown, who was my principal at the time, he is, twice my size. And he, I was like, I'm not gonna have this conversation for a little while. I'm gonna wait till the very last minute. And then I told him, and he jumped up and gave me the biggest hug. And I'll always remember that style of leadership. So I'm really glad to be talking about what it means to be human-centered in your approach today.
Hi everyone, my name is Caroline Pryor. I'm the lead organizer at EmpowerEd. I'm, I think, the newest member of our team. I joined last August, and I'm so excited to be here. Before that, I was teaching 4th grade in South Carolina, and my school was not human-centered at all. We had a really toxic adult culture there, and so I think it was really just powerful for me to join this team and join this movement that is about teacher voice, teacher wellness, and making sure that this job feels sustainable. And the way to do that is human-centered leadership, which I've experienced on this team, and I've experienced through some of my mentors. And so, again, I'm very excited to be here with all of you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Morning. I'm Gracie Obahovich. I think I know most people here. It's really special actually to see you all in one room because so many of you have been so meaningful in this journey over these past 3, almost 4 years of really trying to figure out what educator wellness means and how it works in the system. And I almost never prepare, but I wrote some things down. So there were some points I really wanted to make. So I'm going to read a little bit this morning. So first, I just want to thank you for being here. We know your schedules. We know you're very busy, and it means a lot that you are here this morning with us and together. So the topic of our Educator Wellness Symposium today is human-centered leadership. And I want to span out a little bit and really focus on the human part of human-centered leadership to really set the stage. Because say what you want about human beings, we have done really well for ourselves as a species, right? I made it a project this spring to read the book Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. Has anyone read that book? It is not brief, it's long, but it does cover a lot. And there were 2 things in this book that I think really stood out to me about what it means to be a human being. One, human beings have not succeeded because we are the smartest or even the biggest. And the Neanderthals had us beat on both of those things, actually. But we succeeded because we were really good at working together. We were really good at organizing, coming up with a goal, everybody playing their part in that goal and achieving something together. And that's essential to our survival and flourishing as a species. The second thing that is interesting about human beings is that we can believe and see something that's not there. So we can have a dream and we can work towards that dream. We can believe in a myth. We have things like religion that we can not totally understand what they are, but we believe in those things and those things guide us. And that might seem really natural to us, but if you think about almost every other species, they don't have that. And I think that's also really important because so much of what we're asking people to do in education is believe in something that they can't quite see yet, believe in some version of themselves that they aren't quite yet. And that those two things are really important, what it means to be a human being. And both of those things require leadership. We need people to help us work effectively together. We need people to give us a vision of what we are working towards, and we can't always believe it for ourselves. So to bring this back for today, EmpowerEd, we've worked for a long time, and we have found in many of our partner schools that you can have incredible initiatives that are really inspiring when you see them on paper, but the factor that will make them work or not work is the people who are leading them. The people who are at the top of the school leadership, who are setting the tone for the culture in them. Unfortunately, we all know that educator retention is an issue in our system, that many educators leave the job after just a couple of years because they don't think that they can make it work. And as much as they love their students, many veteran educators are leaving too because they're just burned out. And so I think the key to really thinking about how to retain these educators is about this human-centered approach to leadership, how to become more flexible, more understanding, as Scott was saying, about when your life changes, the kind of grace that you need, about how we show up for each other today. So we are having a symposium today to discuss these things. And a symposium is not about, we have the answers up here and we're going to share them with you. A symposium is about that the answers are in this room. And what we need to do is we need to talk to each other, engage in dialogue. You add your bit, you add your bit. And together we're going to come out of here with a greater understanding, hopefully some inspiration to work towards that dream that we can't quite achieve yet, but we can see it and we want to work towards it. I want to thank our three panelists who are here today. LeVar Jenkins, who's the principal at Rose Elementary, Dr. Shanita Pilgrim, who is the principal at Berkeley Elementary, and John Roll, who is the principal at Garfield Elementary. They're all three been partners or current partners of ours, and we've really seen the style of human-centered leadership in your schools. And so it means a lot that you all are here to be able to share and give us real-life examples of what you're doing. So thank you again, and I'm going to pass it back to Scott. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna do a little activity to get us started, and then we'll talk a little bit before our panel. And yes, we have posters right here. Does everyone have a pen or something to write with? If you don't, we will come around and distribute them. So we're gonna do something small to start here, which is we want you just to think about the topic that we are talking about today. And like I gave that example of human-centered leadership, I'll give one more just to get your creative juices flowing. I was teaching ESL at a school called Next Step, public charter school, 16 to 24-year-olds getting their GED. And they had come, many were recent immigrants, right? So they came from their country. And I had just, my ESL experience was that I was teaching in Peru for a year before that. So I was in Peru teaching at a private school where a lot of people had a very high literacy rate in Spanish. And then we're studying ESL. And so my approach to teaching ESL relied a lot on grammar. Because they were able to do for people who teach language, they were able to kind of do the grammar to grammar conversion pretty easily, right? And when I was teaching ESL here in my first year, my instructional coach came to me and she was like, observed my class, and she saw that I was like very grammar heavy and I was teaching a pretty beginner class. And so she asked me, can you tell me a little bit more about the students you were teaching last year, right? And so I did. I talked to her about the students that I was teaching in Peru. And through a series of questions, she got around to figuring out that the reason I was relying on grammar more than I was relying on vocabulary was because I was teaching students who were pretty high literacy in their own language to begin with, right? She did not come in and say, the problem is you're relying on grammar and you need to be building up a base of vocabulary first, otherwise they won't understand it, right? She asked me some questions that figured that out. And I thought that was a really good example of human-centered leadership and that she demonstrated curiosity, right? And through the curiosity, she made me talk about what might be different about my approach, right? So just to give some examples, we want you to take a Post-it and write a great example of human-centered leadership that you might know, and briefly what you experienced, and maybe an example that was not great human-centered leadership that you've experienced in your life. And we'll make some parking lots of them. So we'll take like 3 minutes to write. Do we have a color for which one?
Yep, up there.
Oh, there
Pink
we
Post-it, what is not human-centered? Something that you've seen that is not human-centered in leadership. And then blue Post-it, what leadership moves have you seen in your life career that are human-centered? And it can be as specific as you like. What color do you need? Beautiful. Okay. You can put it up there.
I'm gonna wait 1 more minute before anybody moves. Even if you're done, just sit tight for 1 more minute.
Yeah. If somebody needs another Post-it, you can have more than one too.
All right. When you are ready, and it's okay if you're still writing, the pink Post-its are gonna go on this wall right there, and the blue Post-its are gonna go on the wall over there. Once you've posted yours, feel free to walk across to the other side and just do a little gallery walk and look at what others have said. It'll take a couple minutes to do that. So pink Post-its over here, blue Post-its on that wall over there. Best ever. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Get 2 pockets for the Post-its.
Okay, so pink Post-it is a leadership move that you've seen in your life career that is not human-centered. Okay. And then the blue one is human-centered, something that you feel like has been really like affirming of you. Love it. Thank you. Okay. I mean, absolutely.
That's all I know. Check out the other responses. We'll come back in a minute.
Not enough pink one.
Yeah. Gracie, another pink.
Oh, pink, yeah. I love that you're a facilitator.
I know, I'm
always
always like, look at
I
love
I like. I know.
Yes.
Yeah, listen, we're trying.
All right, 1 minute, we'll come back to our seats. We're gonna read some out, so we have All right, so
Yeah,
we had the question about sharing them out, so yes, we'll type it up. We'll share it out with the recording for today. I like to end with the positive. So Gracie, do you want to start first?
I gotta start with this one. This is a 7 to 5 teacher workday, but 45 minutes of planning. That's a lot. I gotta start. And maybe what we could do, I'm curious, I'm gonna read a few of these out, and if you relate to it, if it's something you've experienced, go ahead and raise your hand. So sudden changes without explanation or transparency and no thought to implementation. So if you ever worked in an environment where like things change, you didn't know, okay, a lot of us. Okay, top-down decision making that doesn't consider elevating all stakeholder voices. Can I relate to that one? Sit and get PD. But, who wrote that one? What does sit and get PD mean? Just so we all know.
It's you know that PD that's not designed to consider the way adults learn,
Yeah.
where you just have people talked at and there's no conversation or time to process. It's just like basically like reading a memo at them.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So has anyone experienced that? Have we talked about before? Yeah. I'm gonna read 2 more here. Lack of flexibility and grace on work travel requirements after having a baby. Anyone find a workplace that did not honor what you went through in that period of life? Okay, assuming the worst without having a conversation to find out the why. Who relates to that? Okay, so we can see that these are personal, but they're also kind of universal in some ways. Scott, we need some good energy.
Yes. Oh, there's some good ones and some that are the direct opposites. Okay, so I'll read the one that's direct opposite actually first, which is explaining barriers to travel with new baby. Supervisor asks, "How can I support you?" So very different approach. We actually, a little known fact, because I think there's not a lot of transparency about this data sometimes. The majority of teachers that we lose are actually in that time frame, right, of having a child. Right, it's the most common age frame that we are losing in DC is like I think it's between 29 and 35. So like prime time, right? People are having their first child, and it usually is the case if you look very granularly at it that it's like they stay a year and maybe 2, and then there's a pretty big drop off. And anecdotally, as we've heard from people when we were doing the work around flexible scheduling, is that like people have a child, they try to stick it out a little bit, and a lot of people decide it's not going to work. So that's a really good one. Debrief after crisis, transparency, accountability, and missteps. Great that someone's doing this. And this is, I think one of the things we hear all the time is not happening, right? Is not just like the immediate debrief, but there's really follow-up to it. And like people are continuing to think about the well-being of their staff a week later, a month later after there's been a crisis. The last one I'll read is, new team leader came in and started by having get to know you meetings. Continue these check-ins 2 times per year. So that's a lot of time. Did anybody have like one-on-ones experience, like doing one-on-ones with the school leader? That is a lot of time investment. And I totally understand any principal who's like, I have 50 people, I have 100 people. Like I don't have the time to do one-on-ones twice a year with all of my people. But there's also a back end time you're spending not doing them, right? Because of all the obstacles that are kind of come up, not, right? Having the chance to know what the obstacles are, right, for your individuals. And a lot of people set up here basically getting to know me as a person, right? And not just as an employee. So great to see that some of these things are happening from your experience. Thank you for starting by sharing all that. Really appreciate it. I'm going to talk now for like 10 minutes just about relational trust and human-centered leadership and kind of how we see this and why it's important. And then we're going to start to hear from our panel. So this is the way we see human-centered leadership and why it's so important, which it really is an approach that is just focused on the people that you are being led, right? Like understanding that schools are human organizations and we have to think about the humans in them first. And the focus is on developing trusting relationships, the assumption that the humans are the most important asset in the organization. And it rejects, and this is like what we're always on our high horse about, it rejects zero-sum assumptions. So it rejects the idea that you have to choose between prioritizing students and prioritizing educators, and embraces the fact that there are bountiful win-win situations, right, that we can create. This has been a big part of the work we've done around flexible scheduling, but it also relates to the daily empathy and self-care that people demonstrate in how they set up practices in the school, right? That we understand that, like, one of the things we're always coaching school leaders through and trying to manage is professional expectations and the empathy that comes with, you know, human-centered approach, right, to educator wellness. And we have to maintain professional expectations, obviously. Students are in the classroom. We can't have teachers showing up after the students are there. There's a level of expectation and we need for everybody. But maybe it doesn't require that when they come in, we have to highlight their name and send them a letter, right, about the book. Maybe we have a conversation instead of doing that. So there are alternative approaches sometimes that take a more human-centered approach to how we enforce professional expectations. So we try not to choose, right, between is this good for students, is this good for teachers? We like to say, if you haven't come up with a solution that's good for both, keep thinking. We're not quite there yet. Anyone want to answer this? How to explain trust? Someone who's never heard that word. What would you say?
It is an exchange of energy that is mutually beneficial.
Ooh, I love it. I love the inclusion of energy there.
Good.
Anyone's ever said that, but I love that. Yeah.
A space or place where I feel safe to be vulnerable.
Yes. Okay. So we got mutual exchange, right? The energy, safety, vulnerability. Yes.
And I'm thinking shared connection and safety.
Shared connection. Yeah. Love that. Anybody else?
As in a belief in the goodness of something, or a situation, that person.
Yeah. A belief in their goodness. And one other thing that's really important to it is also a belief in their competence, right? Like a belief that that person is going to do the job that they say they're going to do, that you can count on them, right, to follow through and to do those things. Okay. So, relational trust is related to that, but a little bit different, right? We're really talking about interpersonal dynamics of trust within an organization, right? It's not just an individual to individual, but how does this work in an organization? There's a lot of research in education about relational trust specifically and what that means. We'll talk about that research in a second, but it goes back to the University of Chicago. Brick and Schneider did this research in 2003. And what it was, and there's been a lot of work since then, is how foundational relational trust is to student success and student outcomes in the long range. So I'll share a couple of things about that. One is you can see this data about the chance of making improvements in student learning, whether you have strong relational trust in the building or weak relational trust. We'll talk more about what those activities, behaviors are that are trust and that don't imply trust. But there's another part of the research that I think is equally important, which is what they found was that there's a lot of schools that actually see big spikes in student achievement gain from implementing turnaround style methods. You know, like company will come in, they'll implement a bunch of policies and procedures, they'll do this kind of turnaround thing. And what it often implies is like very, very high expectations for people, very, very little leeway, a kind of no excuses approach to things. And often it ends up in kind of a narrowed curriculum. Like we're going to meet reading and math goals, we're going to succeed on the tests. And we can do that, right, in a couple of years, because if you're not making that happen, out of the way, right? Mm-hmm. But what happens is that out of the way part, right, the no excuses part, means that a couple of years later, you have different teachers and staff, right? And they don't remember how the people who did it well did it. They didn't transfer the knowledge, right, from staff to staff. Professional development, right, has to kind of restart all over again. You're rebuilding your culture all over again. And so what this research found was that the schools that had a consistent upward trajectory were the ones that had a very high degree of relational trust. And they might not have gained as fast, but they gained consistently, right, over time. And their scores, their academic outcomes, continued to go up year over year. But the schools that had this, like, we're going to turn things around in a year or two, went like this with their scores, right? They were able to turn scores around, but they dipped, they went back up, they dipped again because they had a lot of turnover. They were kind of lacking a fundamental trust within the staff. So that's the research about why this is important. And we talk in our school workshops kind of about these structures and behaviors that don't build trust. To me, it's always a red flag when we hear from people in a school this suspicion of outsiders, or like honestly, educators not appreciating, not liking that other people are in their class, right? Because in a really thriving culture, people love that there's someone stepping into their class, right? Like they think, first of all, they're going to observe me. I'm going to get some positive feedback from this. They're going to watch me do something awesome, right? If it's not exactly what it is, they're not going to judge me, right? What I expect of myself. When you have a suspicion of outsiders, why is this person coming into the building? Why are they coming in here? And what we experience a lot from veteran educators is this attitude that, look, I've been here, I've seen a million initiatives. What I'm going to do is shut my door and teach my class. And, you know, like everything outside, I'm not going to pay attention to it, right? Because that's what I need to do to protect myself and my well-being. The problem is that schools are teams, right? Everything is interconnected in a school. So if we get to a place where we're suspicious of outsiders, where teachers are really isolated, where there's a lot of ego involved, then the teachers might not be communicating with the other teachers, and they might be doing things that are mutually beneficial, that if they were co-planning, right, the students would be doing better together. They might not be communicating to the social worker about a need that's pretty, you know, critical for the student in that time. So we can get to a place where people say, I'm really good at my job, so I'm just going to close the door and do my job. And then we get less, right? It's not as fruitful, right, for the students in the long run because there's not the coordination and collaboration we need. And so we look for some of these things. And the other one I'll point to is happy talk, or something that we call toxic positivity sometimes, right? Which is just like when there is something that is a real and persistent problem, the response to that is just like, hey, we're all in it for the kids, no excuses, right? Instead of like, tell me more about that. Like, how can we solve it together, right? And so they're like, no excuses, happy talk, something to look forward to. So we talked a little bit about this, looking for respect, integrity, personal regard, and confidence as elements of relational trust. All right. We're going to play this little video. Those who have been in one of our workshops might have seen this before, but it's from Simon Sinek, who does a lot of organizational psychology kind of work about how we can measure trust.
How do we do it?
Let me switch. It's probably the Zoom. 1 second.
Of all the videos we've ever shown in a school environment, this is the one that gets the most reactions. I'll just say that there's something in this video that like really speaks to people.
All right, let's see if this works, but we might need our building help to make it happen. So let's try this first.
Oh. Can we just do it on your computer?
All right, I'm going to do it on the computer and we'll see if it's loud enough to hear. Oh, you know what? This is the one that's the sound through there. Where's the remote? Oh, here, that's what you're
No,
doing. Okay.
I don't know.
All right, we're gonna skip this, and he's gonna come.
Okay,
in a second.
you have to see this video. This is
Yeah.
important. Oh, wait, no, it's there. We got it. No, we didn't get it. Never mind.
All right, he's gonna come and help us with the sound in a second. Let me talk about feedback, because this is something I gave an example about a little bit earlier, which is like curious, not judgmental feedback. Before that, before we get that video on, I want to mention an example of relational trust that's really important, because he's going to talk about why we should measure relational trust. But I think the equally important question to that is how, because a lot of people are like, okay, I get it. Like I buy the fact that we should measure relational trust. Collaboration is really important. It's just as important as measuring individual performance. But then folks are like, well, how do I do that? I had to survey people, right? How does that work? So there was a great episode on a podcast I heard with the CEO of Shake Shack. And they have a philosophy at Shake Shack, which is that what we measure, 51% of what we measure is how the employees are to each other. And 49% of what we measure is how they are to the clients. And that is a counterintuitive approach to many, right? We're like, the clients are the most important thing. It's why we exist. Just like why we exist as schools is to serve the students. And he said the reason he do that is because we believe first and foremost in cycles, right? So you can have positive cycles and negative cycles and spirals. But also that the way we measure in our evaluation is the first the first thing we measure is how people are to each other. And there's a lot of ways we measure that. The supervisors are involved in measuring it. There are trust surveys and other things that they're doing with the staff. Number one is how you are with each other. Number two is how you are to the client, because they believe if you're being good to each other, you're going to be good to the client. The third thing they measure is how they are to the community they're in, right? Like, how well do they treat their community? So in our school, you might imagine that as like, how are we treating the parents, the families, the school community that we exist in? The fourth thing they measure in their evaluation system is measuring how they are to their suppliers, right? This is a little bit of a different environment. And the fifth thing they measure is their outcomes with investors, right? And a lot of businesses do the complete inverse of that, right? They might measure some client things first, but a lot of them are ultimately looking at the investors and the kind of financial outcomes as the first thing and working backwards from that. And what he says is that by flipping it, by prioritizing the inputs first and the outputs last, we're actually getting the outputs that we want much more effectively than if we had focused on the outputs or the outcomes that we're desiring. So let's go back and see if we can
Okay.
do this.
Everybody send good energy.
Plus, I just think this is genius. So I've worked with the Navy SEALs, and I asked them, like, how do you pick like the guys who go on SEAL Team 7? Right? Because they're the best. And they drew a graph for me. And on one side, they wrote the word performance, and on the other side, they wrote the word trust. The way they define the terms is performance on the battlefield and performance off the battlefield. So this is your skills. Did you make your quarterly earnings, whatever, however you want to translate it, right? Performance, traditional. This is, how are you off the battlefield? What kind of person are you? The way they put it is, I may trust you with my life, but do I trust you with my money and my wife? They're SEALs. This is what they told me. Nobody wants this person, the low performer of low trust, of course. Of course, everybody wants this person, the high performer of high trust, of course. What they learned is that this person, the high performer of low trust, is a toxic leader and a toxic team member. And they would rather have a medium performer of high trust, sometimes even a low performer of high trust, it's a relative scale, over this person. This is the highest performing organization on the planet, and this person is more important than this person. And the problem in business is we have lopsided metrics. We have 1,000,001 metrics to measure someone's performance and negligible to no metrics to measure someone's trustworthiness. And so what we end up doing is promoting or bonusing toxicity in our businesses, which is bad for the long game because it eventually destroys the whole organization. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. And it hits home, I think, particularly in education, because we measure a lot in education, and it's hard. I think we'd all be hard pressed to write up on a board the ways that we measure trust, human-centered leadership, how people are to each other, and the inputs that we know actually get the outcomes that we desire. So one of the ways that we say we should do that is through human-centered, curious feedback. So if there are Ted Lasso fans in here, you may have seen this clip before. We're going to play this and talk a little bit about what it sounds like.
These are like our two favorite video clips for sure.
Such a good scene.
Rupert, guys have underestimated me my entire life. And for years, I never understood why. He used to really bother me. Then one day, I was driving my little boy to school, and I saw this quote by Walt Whitman painted on the wall there. It said, "Be curious, not judgmental." And I like it. So I get back in my car, I'm driving to work, and all of a sudden it hits me. All them fellas used to belittle me. A single one of them curious. You know, they thought they had everything all figured out, so they judged everything. They judged everyone. And I realized that they're underestimating me. Who I was had nothing to do with it. Because if they were curious, they would ask questions. You know, questions like, "Have you played a lot of darts, Ted?" Which I would have answered, "Yes, sir." Every Sunday afternoon at a sports bar with my father from age 10 to I was 16 when he passed away. for yourself.
Okay,
All right. So we love this. We love the scene and we love the phrase, right? Be curious, not judgmental. And I shared that my instructional coach teaching ESL and what that sounded like, right? But we think this is a consistent thing. I'm going to share one more story about this. And we're going to move to the panel, which is that we were at a school working recently, and we're getting a similar dynamic that we've gotten in a lot of things, which is the teachers are not meeting expectations, right? And how do we talk to them differently to make sure that the teachers meet expectations? And the example they gave was, people are doing a lot of differentiated instruction, so they're on laptops a lot, and they're doing their own, programs. And our teachers are going around and they're just saying, like, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you good? Are you good? And then the teacher goes back and sits down. And that's not okay. The teacher needs to do more than that, right? They need to ask them better questions to figure out what their roadblocks are and why they're not succeeding. And we agreed. And then later in the conversation, they were talking about getting teacher feedback. And what they said is, we had this insight survey and we give it to our teachers, and we've gone around like 4 times and said, have you done the survey? Have you done the survey? Have you done the survey? And the teachers keep saying no. And I don't understand why they won't do it. We've asked them like 4 times to do the survey. And what we said very gently, right, was just like you want your teachers to ask a better question, right? We have to work on better questions to the teachers, right? Which might sound something like, do you feel like it's confidential when you give us feedback? Is there a reason you don't feel comfortable filling out this survey, right? Is there something about giving us feedback in the past that's made you not want to do it again, right, this time? And a different question might have elicited a different response than like what the teachers were giving them, which is, I'll get to it, I'll get to it, I'll get to it. And then they don't, and they're asking them again. And so one of the lessons for us is always that if we're doing something for the students, right, we're asking our teachers to do something for the students, which we actually absolutely should. We have to have really high expectations for our educators. We also have to have high expectations for how we talk and not assume that adults don't need the same thing, right? They need the eliciting, they need the curiosity, and that curiosity is what's going to get us to the place that we're trying to go. So we're going to hear now a lot of more examples from our educators about what that actually sounds like. We're going to move to our panel, and I'm going to turn it over to Caroline.
Okay, I'm going to invite our panelists up. Thank you so much, Scott, for our presentation on relational trust. You all want to come up and take your seat. And while you do so, I'm going to read our bios for our amazing panelists. I will start with Principal Rowe to my left. So Mr. John Roll is entering his 20th year in the field of education. 10 of those years have been with DCPS. And with experience at the middle and elementary levels in both public and public charter school sectors, Mr. Roll has taught and led in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. In his last year in the classroom, he was named the 2011 D.C. Teacher of the Year by OPSI. In 2015, Mr. Roll joined DCPS as the Dean of Students at Stanton, where he led culture for grades K through 2, and he supported strategic interventions for scholars. He transitioned to serve as Stanton's ELA instructional coach, oversaw the department's double-digit PARCC proficiency gains and double-digit decreases in PARCC level 1 scores. Following Stanton, Mr. Roll became a founding assistant principal at Ida B. Wells. He also served as the RISE resident principal at Smothers Elementary, and he is currently the proud principal of Garfield Elementary, which is such an amazing school. All right, I am going to move on then to Dr. Janita Pilgrim, who is a proud DC native and a proud product of DCPS. She has over 24 years of experience in education, teacher, instructional coach, master educator, AP, currently her 6th year as principal of Burrville Elementary School. Dr. Pilgrim aims to build and bridge gaps in education by empowering families with tools necessary to strengthen connections between home and school. She also recognizes the commitment to lifelong learner means proactively developing and discovering ways to react to the needs of our students. And that means knowing when to tap into additional resources as needed to reach various needs of stakeholders and knowing when to pass the baton. Dr. Pilgrim is committed to expanding opportunities for educators advocate for their needs and holding them accountable to the growing demands in education. And I want to highlight that again, growing demands in education. She believes now more than ever is the time to partner with educators to seize opportunities, develop young minds, and shape our future, especially with our students furthest from opportunity. The time is now. Dr. Pilgrim received her bachelor's from GW, her master's from Regent, and her doctorate also from GW. And then finally, we will turn to Principal LeVar Jenkins, who is Gracie's kid's principal.
I'm totally biased. Burroughs is such an amazing school.
Yeah, and they love it there. LeVar Jenkins is a seasoned educator with a diverse background in school administration and special education. He began his teaching career in 2001 as a middle school English teacher in PG County, and later expanded his experience by teaching in Fairfax County. In 2016, he took on the role of principal at John Burroughs Elementary School, following his tenure as the special education coordinator at Baycroft and West Education Campus, now known as John Lewis. His leadership journey also includes serving as AP at H.D. Cook and Plummer. Since assuming the principalship at John Burroughs, Principal Jenkins has overseen remarkable increase in ELA proficiency on PART, achieving a substantial 26% growth between 2019 and 2020. He firmly believes in the importance of teacher retention and has made it a priority to create supportive environments that value and recognize contributions of educators. His efforts are driven by a passion for building a community of curious and confident students, preparing them to succeed academically and beyond. So I'm going to invite another. It's snowing. Apologies.
The kids would do the same thing.
That'll be great. I want to invite another round of applause for our. And I think I'll start with you, Principal Jenkins. First question for the panel is just introduce yourself and share a little bit about your school community, what you think makes your school special.
Hello again, everyone. LeVar Jenkins, proud principal of Burroughs Elementary School. I think one of the things that makes my school unique is the community feeling to the school. When I first assumed the principalship at Burroughs, there was so much experience in the building. I have teachers that have been there since 1997. So the experience is just really phenomenal. And one of the things that I try to rely on is to rely on their expertise to push the school to make us greater. So for me, it was just a teacher experience in the building. It was phenomenal.
Oh, good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Pilgrim, the very proud principal of Burrowville Elementary School, as she already said, the Bill on the Hill. We coined that, so that's yes, it's on the mural at our school. I think that what makes our school unique is family engagement. I would say that's something that we have really transformed since I started in 2016 as the AP there. I noticed that as an AP, that was a gap for us. And so because I was an AP at the time, there were certain things that, you know, as you just kind of notice and not really say too much. You kind of do what, you know, you're told. And so when I was able to become principal, that was one of the first things that I tackled. And so we do have monthly chat and choose where we see our parents as partners. And I think that has already helped support, like, break down barriers. And so we want to have that, like, community effort and feel so that parents can see the school as a place of comfort and joy, and that excellence lives here at Burrowville, which is also an mural at our school. We want to let folks know that we have the best interest for their students. And I think it starts with that trust that we were talking about earlier. And so a lot of times what we've noticed, what I've noticed as an AP was that it was very combative, our conversations with the teachers and parents. And so one thing that we were really intentional about was making sure that we transformed those conversations, and that came through our chat and choose, through surveys, through focus talks, just to make sure that we're doing what's right for our kids and for our families. And teachers joined in with that as well, because they noticed that once we started having those conversations, the walls, they came down, and our teachers were able to have stronger conversations and stronger, build that trust with them, from families to home to school.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. John Roll, principal at Garfield. I thought of two things. I would say resiliency and I think optimism. So my school community just moved into a brand new modernized building, which we are super proud. Which has been just a great catalyst for like resuming optimism, as I would say is the second word. So we are in the heart of Ward 8. I think everybody in the room knows the specific challenges that come with leading and educating in a school that has a lot of community-based concern. And with all the change, I think the thing that I've noticed about the staff, the community, and the scholars is that there is this resiliency and this optimism about the future. So it's my second year as principal, so a lot of year one was just getting us into this building, really trying to work on this idea of trust and really defining what we want to see for the future. So that second word, optimism, is huge for us this year because we're really in the stage of building those bonds, building those connections, reestablishing what family looks like, getting to know the community with our new staff members, but really trying to chart out the educational experience that we want for our scholars moving forward. And that's far beyond our test scores. Really just thinking about what do we see the school experience for our babies each day and what does that look like? So I'm excited about that part of my community.
Thank you. What I heard from all three of you is that there's a lot of like pride in your communities and really leaning into the assets of the people that are in the building. So our next question then is, how would you describe your leadership style, and would you describe it as team-centered leadership? We'll throw that out to you. I can volunteer you, but we all know how helpful.
Sure, I'm sorry. I think I would describe my leadership style as human-centered. I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is that I've worked the most for people that I felt like cared about me. So coming in, it was important to make sure that I got to know everyone as individuals. I'm starting to learn about their families, about the things that they like, they dislike, how they like to receive feedback, what do things, do that are available to them that make them feel comfortable. So I feel like it is a leadership style that is rooted in growing trust. I think it's also a leadership style that's open. One of the things that, I've experienced over the years is coming into a school environment where there's been a change in leadership or a change of some sort. And there's this bulldoze tactic of like, we're just going to come in and ransack everything that you've done. And what was important for me was to validate the experiences and the time that people in my community have spent. So I'm new, large in part, right? So what worked, what didn't work? Of course, I'm going to look with my leadership lens and make changes and pivots as they need. But it's important to validate, understand, and be a part of the experiences of the people that have been there, that have put in the work, that know the community, that know the needs of the scholars, and can help drive this work forward over the long haul. So I would say definitely I feel like it's human-centered and really just open and really trying to get the perspectives, the ideas, and the experiences of the folks that have led and been in the community for years. Yeah.
And I would just add to that, that I do believe that I'm human-centered as well. I think that we have no choice but to be in these roles as principals because we have to make sure everyone is okay. And so with that, I would say that also means that feeling comfortable in the seat of vulnerability. So sometimes for me, that is sharing that I don't know the answer either. And so even as principals, we're often charged with having the answers, having the solution, being able to just, what's the solution, what's the strategy, what we're gonna do. Sometimes, and I gotta say this, like COVID put everybody on pause because we all just did not know the answers to things that, as school leaders, we're often charged to do that. So putting in that seat of vulnerability and then exposing that level of vulnerability with my staff and with my parents, I definitely know that built trust and also built that human-centeredness. Also, that I think that human-centeredness is also the reason why I'm partnering with EmpowerEd, because I know that that's not a lane that I'm really comfortable in as far as, I don't want to say feelings, but also like that self-care. That's something I'm learning too as a school leader. So because I don't have the answers all figured out for myself, I expose that to my staff. So like, I'm telling them like, just because I may be here and I'm not feeling well, doesn't mean you need to be here and not feel well. Like you're going to be in front of the kids. Take off. It's okay. I sent a teacher home yesterday. I was like, she's in there with the mask on, the eyes are looking droopy. Please go to urgent care. It's okay. I see your dedication, like recognizing that it's okay not to be here because it's important to take care of yourself. And again, it's about making sure that our teachers, our staff are their best selves so they can show up for our students every day. Otherwise, we're going to get what we get and we can't be upset. So we have to be very much adult-centered, human-centered, student-centered as well, because that's who we are here for. So I want to keep that in mind too, because we're thinking about humans. Students are humans too. And we got to make sure that we keep them in that whole focus as well. Sometimes we get so adult-driven that we don't think about the kids, and that's who we're there for. So we have to make sure that they are included in that whole trust situation.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, the human centeredness is an important aspect of this, but I also think identity is also equally important. We as leaders have to tap into our employees, teachers, staff. We have to tap into who they are as a person and how their identity shapes them as a person. So me as a Black man from New Orleans, grew up Catholic, I'm going to show up to work differently than a single Black mom who comes to work. So for me, a lot of the work is getting to know staff and having a team around you that can sort of help you with that work. As a leader, we can't get to everything at every single moment, but we have to know our staff identities and how they show up to work and how we can address that. Your identity helps to shape who you are, right? So like, if an individual is showing up to work in a specific way, we know the reason why. Something may have happened to them previously, and we're trying to get in touch with that. So I think as we talk about relational trust, it's equally important to tap into identities as well.
Thank you for those responses, and I do want to highlight it. So like that identity piece is really, it shapes so much of your relations and your like beginning level of trust, I think, as well. And so it definitely like mediates our experiences in school. And I want to elevate also, so I'm very leaning into elevating people's expertise and experience in the building, and also just being vulnerable, like showing, I think one of the common misconceptions about leadership is that you need to have everything together. And that's a pressure that teachers feel, it's a pressure that many students feel. And I think modeling that it's okay to not have all this is vital. Thank you. So when we're thinking about relational trust, I think for many people, it's either something that you've seen modeled, or it's something that you've just sort of like come to a breaking point. I have to try something new. So is there a lesson you could tell us about relational trust that has led you to your leadership style? I'll start with Dr. Kluger.
Okay, I'll do it. Yeah, okay. I think COVID is what kind of shaped my leadership style. So I became principal in October of 2019. So it was non-traditional, the July, and had the pomp and circumstance. It was like, hey, I need you to step up. And it was like, okay. And that's what it was. And shortly after that, we were on the news with the case of a student who had meningitis. So that was the start of my leadership. It was like, we're on the Fox 5, parents are outside, and it's like, go out there and say everything is okay. And I think that, you know, I did. And it's like, I'm super calm with all of this. And I'm just like, you know, I can't afford not to be, you know what I mean? I was just like, you know, I'm going to be calm and collected because we're already dealing with a lot of the change, and then also being on the news, and then the parent calling me and like, yeah, that's my child. I was like, yeah, you got to step down with the news. You know, it was all of those things, but I think it's being relational. Like I wear that as a badge of honor that I'm a DC native. Like my families know that, my people know that. They know that I'm a graduate of DC public schools, and I wear that as a badge of honor. Like they know, I'm like, what high school you went to? That's always a DC talk. What high school you went to? I went to Tech. I always say Tech, but that's where I went. So that's a conversation. And I think that builds relatability to my families and also with my staff. They know I'm a single mom. I got 3 kids. My oldest is 25 and lives in New York. I have that out there. Everybody knows that the teacher who taught her is back there in the back. You know, I'm gonna make sure I take this with. But yeah, like, you know, just exposing that part of your life. Like we're human too. And I think sometimes we have the title as principal, and you know, it comes with this let's have the blazer and the suit and the tie and the purse and the bag and the heels. And this is only for you guys, because y'all didn't see me off days. Y'all sleep when I'm up. But I think that with that expectation, it's also about being relatable and being your authentic self. And I'm okay to be that way in front of my families, in front of my staff. And I think that builds the trust. So when I'm having conversations with them, it doesn't take nothing for me to say, we're having an emergency staff meeting tomorrow morning, and we're all there talking about whatever the issue is. It doesn't take anything for me to do that, and they understand that role that I have, and I have that expectation of them, and they expect that from me. And so I think that over time, my consistency with that has built our trust. And again, we're human, we make mistakes, the ball gets dropped, I may forget to say something, it happens. I think owning that as well is a part of the relational experiences that we've had. Like, own when you drop the ball. I forgot to send that email. Sorry. Oh, it's okay, no problem. Because when you build that pathway, that runway up until then, it's okay when you drop the ball. It's allowed, right? Because as principals, sometimes we get this, this expectation we can't make mistakes. And especially if the system and the culture is very much compliance driven, it doesn't give you the opportunity to make mistakes. And my folks know that very well. Just look at an email with the red exclamation point. Nobody wants that. But it's really about, making sure that you are putting yourself, whatever you feel comfortable with sharing as leaders out there and sharing who you are. And I think that gets reciprocated. So that's been my experience. It's just how I started in leadership.
And I think owning those mistakes, and explaining, like owning the mistake and explaining the why behind the decision of how you came to that mistake is also equally important. In my first year at Burroughs, prior to me getting there were 4 principals in the span of a year. So there was a lot of turnover within the school. And going in, I was constantly told, Principal Jenkins, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to focus on this, focus on that. I was focused on so many things that I did drop the ball a lot. I made a lot of mistakes. But for me, I didn't necessarily explain how I got to a decision in addition to owning the mistake. So for me, I had to do a lot of backtracking in terms of building the relational trust. And so now if I make a mistake, I just say, hey, I messed up. This is why I made the decision. This is what we need to do moving forward. Or if you have an idea, like, let's talk about it so we can problem solve. So I think owning the mistake is equally important, but also explaining why you made that decision for that mistake helps to build that relational trust as well.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what was said. I think one thing I would throw in is just how you show up. I think for me, when I was a teacher and or a coach, the times that I saw leaders actually showing up allowed me to build trust. So like one thing that all my mentors and as a principal I do is like, I'm at arrival, I'm at dismissal. Like, it doesn't matter what happens, like you're gonna see my face there. Like if we're short on lunch duty, like I'm at lunch duty, I'm out at recess. Or like sometimes if we have coverage issues, like I'm not unwilling to cover a class. And I think part of what we do as educators in DC is really hard work. And I think a lot of times our teachers and staff feel like it's us versus them versus us working collaboratively, which builds that trust. And I think just the fact that you are showing up, right? Like I'm picking up trays at breakfast the same way, like one of my aides is picking up trays at breakfast, and like having that level of, at minimum, this person is showing up to do the work that I'm doing, I think is huge. I also thought about just 2 conversations I had yesterday in terms of showing up. I had a really rough conversation with my math instruction coach on Tuesday. And I reflected on the conversation. It was like, I went real hard on her. After I left that conversation, I was like, all right, like, what are the next steps? So like, she happened to be out on Wednesday, but when she came in on Thursday, I was like, let's have a chat, right? Like, it was 8:50, like, I got cussed out right after this meeting. I had another issue, like, before this, like, I was just not in a space to, like, truly receive what you were bringing to me. So, like, we definitely need to revisit what we were talking about, but it's okay for me to say, you know what, like, I didn't show up the way I needed to show up in that conversation. And I think I want my staff to have that same level of vulnerability. There are going to be times like, because we all know when 95% of the time when you're coming to the principal, it's usually not good news. So like we're dealing with people with frustration and urgency all the time. So part of our job is to make them, even if it's not true, I must say, feel like we have that same level of urgency, or we can help them navigate what that urgency is. And the other conversation I had was about showing up, like always going to dismissal. I had a teacher who was fairly quiet, new to the community, and like I'll literally just walk around and ask how everyone's day was. We started talking about Thanksgiving, and I was like, this is a time where we can potentially connect. So I shared with her, little less than 2 years ago, I lost my mom. So part of my like weird funk, I feel like this week is like Thanksgiving is approaching. And she shared with me that like in the last 5 years, she lost her mom, her dad, and her brother. So we were able to really just start to bond and connect over something that had nothing to do with school, but like just how we were feeling in this moment and what Thanksgiving and the anxiety around it looked like for us. So I think sometimes it's just being present and just asking something as small as like, what are you doing for Thanksgiving? Or like, how are you feeling today? Is really important as we think about like human-centered leadership.
Well, I had a story yesterday. It was so interesting. I happened to be walking to the playground, and the kindergarten teacher and the aide, they were trying to escort students back in from recess. So if you can imagine 50 kindergarten students trying to come back into the building. And there was one student who just did not want to come back into the building. So as I'm walking to the playground, the aide was actually struggling, trying to get the student to come back into the building. And I just said, hey, I have it, you go in with the kids, it's fine. And the aide was so appreciative of that. I didn't necessarily see it as something major, but he found me after school to say, thank you so much. I need to buy you lunch. I'm like, no, it's just part of the job. You know what I mean? So I'm saying all that to say how we show up really does impact the relational trust as well.
I think for school leaders, and I'm going to do better projecting. Thank you. For school leaders, I think there's definitely that tension as well, where you're in sort of a tough spot. You need to focus on getting results, but you also need to focus on giving grace to yourself and your people. How do you walk that balance? It's a little question. I'm going to give a minute of think time, and then gonna head to.
No, I'll start. Because I'm a woman, and like he'll be like, I'm gonna just go and cry, and we just go on, we start together. Because I could be very much like, it was due yesterday. I don't know why it's, you don't have it right now. But on the other hand, I am that person. But what I do is I have an accountability partner. I do believe in having people I will call a bar. Okay, I will call a couple of people in my cluster and ask them, hey, am I tripping? You know what I mean? As check my level of accountability. Am I going too hard in the paint right here? You know what I'm saying? And it's good to get somebody that's in your cluster because they know the same initiatives. They know what we're up against. They know what our specific unique needs are. So LeVar could tell you, I have called him, I have texted him. I'm like, give me a call when you get a chance. Sometimes it's a call, and then it's like, I just called you. I need you to call me now. It'll be that type of thing. Like, am I tripping? And trusting him to say, nah, Pilgrim, you ain't tripping. Go ahead and handle that. Or, nah, let him go ahead on. Because again, I was doing this by myself. I didn't have an AP. This is the first year I had an AP. So a lot of this was just on me as the sole leader of the building. So it was like, what move do I make? Is this right? You know what I mean? So I have an AP this year. That's building self-care for the principal. Thank you. Shout out to that. But then also having people that you really do trust, because you can't do principalship on your own. I don't care what anybody says. Yes, it is an isolating job, but it's not meant to be isolating. So I do believe in tapping in, and only because Roll is not in my cluster. He once was, I did check in, but because LeVar is in my cluster, it's not, so much of a phone call. And that's how I check myself, because sometimes we can't be so focused on a deadline, so focused on compliance, so focused on not getting an email with a red exclamation point that we lose sight of, the humanness, the sight of, the bigger picture. Like, folks are dealing with a lot of things as we all are. And it's like, what are you willing to really make it a big deal about? Or are you really going to be like, you know what, let me help you with this conversation, or let me help, and he will role play. So when I say he will do all the boxes for you, let's role play this conversation real quick. How is it gonna go this way? Like, it's important to have an accountability partner as a school leader. You can't talk to anybody in your school, because that's bias, and that is show favoritism, and they're not even supposed to know half this stuff. So, I mean, they found out it's not because you said anything, but you have to build that like circle of trust, like have to expand beyond just you. Because I can't stress it enough. You cannot do principalship, you cannot do school leadership by yourself. You just can't. If you do, we see what happens. It'll be short-lived, but I'm trying to, have some longevity in this, Shout out to Greg.
So I was thinking about accountability and support from like a perspective of like dealing with your teachers and staff. I think framing is an important part of what that could potentially look like. So like when you go into those conversations or when you are collaborating with staff related to accountability and support, I think it's important to focus on the problem and not the person. So like, for example, if you have a staff member or teacher that constantly does not turn things in, I'm not going to refer back to the 10 times that you didn't turn in something. I'm going to refer to this one specific time when you didn't turn it in. And I always like to frame things in a positive and not the negative, but also I always end those conversations with two questions. How can I hold you accountable and how can I support you? And I think those two questions help to get the other person to self-reflect on what they can do better, but also hold me accountable, to hold you accountable. You know what I mean? So I think though, it's just the framing. I think the framing is equally important.
I would say a couple things to add. I think one of the best pieces of leadership advices I got was to think about which balls are rubber and which balls are glass. And I think sometimes, like, as principals, everything can feel like glass when some of them are actually rubber, right? And for the ones that are rubber, I'm not going to put that pressure on my staff just yet. I'm going to make sure that I help them prioritize like what things are most essential at the time. And I think why is really important. So I know the way I am, like I'm highly compliant, but I just want to know why, right? Like I'm going to do it, but like I really need you to tell me why I have to do it. And it's being honest. Like sometimes I'm like, y'all, DCPS is making us do this. Like, please get it done by this date. It is okay. Like, we just got to get it done, right? Other times it's like, let's talk about like the deep investment behind like what this means for our kids and our community and why this is important. And I thought about like Scott earlier was talking about the insight survey. Like we ended up having a 96% rate with one teacher missing. But we give the results, right? Like we had another survey we took, we talked about it in all, like there isn't a secret here. Like this is what y'all said. Here's how we're gonna think about it as a community, whether it's good, bad, ugly, or wonderful. And I think when people are invested in the why and like they see the effects of the things that you're asking to do, because like that's a 20 or 30-minute survey, right? They could be doing something else, then it becomes something that they are more, inept to do because they see and understand the rationale behind what this task is being asked. So I think that is something that's important in leadership too.
Closing questions, speed round. This is one of our favorite questions, but if you had a magic wand to change one thing in education, what would it be?
Innovation. I think we are at a place where like society is changing, but school may not be changing. We're sort of stuck in this time frame and era of tradition, but society is far more advanced, and I wish I could just wave that wand and catch us up to society.
Thinking about one thing I would want to add, and that would be more creativity, like as far as I want to have a band at my school. Like I played at Maury, I played the clarinet. That's how I learned how to play. And that's why I was interested in music. I would want that. I know that's one thing I would wait to add to have at the school. I would think that students should have the freedom to be as creative as they want to be. And I feel like it's very constricting. And I would love for that to be as valued just as reading and writing is.
I have two, but I'm gonna try to slide them together. I think just true community schools, right? I think a lot of times, like, we will say, oh, we're a community school, but like, we really don't have the healthcare, the mental health care, like all the supports. So if I could wave that wand, like, I would make sure that every school had that true feel. And my second one, and I'll slide in, money aside, like, if every kid had a personal concierge, that would just be amazing, right? Like, someone who's like responsible for like making sure that like all their appointments are taken care of, like their mental health or like some sort of advisement, like they have homework help like built in. I just think a lot of our kids, even kids that, you know, come from quote unquote good households, right? And that's a whole other panel, right? But, you know, it's a situation where like parents just need help, kids need help. And I think a lot of times we just don't have that help readily accessible. So it would be awesome to just have that right there.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can we do one more time? I was trying to and I think it's like really about girls' humanity and the community, what your role is. And I think that's so important for being able to understand this bigger picture, because if you guys can't be human beings, then like the teachers in your school and the families and the students can't be human beings. So thank you for being so human with us. It means a lot. We are gonna take a 5-minute break and you're gonna come back, you can go use the restroom, get some coffee. You're gonna come back, we're gonna be in a different formation because we're gonna go into our discussion groups. So when you come back in here, we're gonna encourage you to sit with people you don't know super well. So if you came with somebody, sit in a different group with them, please, because we're gonna try to generate conversations with as much perspective as possible. You will get bonus points if you have the greatest rainbow of colors in your group, because that
Different roles. And if you have things on the chair, if you can put them off to the side or take them with you for now, we're gonna rearrange, make it collaborative seating here.
Do y'all need help?
11:15, we'll get started again. Yeah.
Break
I'm so glad to see you. I can't wait for our next lunch.
You can leave stuff in the room.
Can't wait for our next lunch.
Right now.
You definitely need to. Oh, y'all, winter break, I think we eat around the beginning of it, so if you're here, you can go, but I wanna know what's happening with your wifey. I will give you on all the good times.
They've been in transition for a year.
Yeah.
Forget to enjoy free spend money.
Can we do two over here? One like a wood.
I'm in a state of flood.
Like the fire, all that. People and I'm kind of a job.
Right, but then you got a job, you've been doing a lot of.